Is Disney bad at Star Wars? Well, that's what The Hollywood Reporter asked this week. Meanwhile, Variety dove into toxic fandoms and the possibility of superfan focus groups. Ewan McGregor has an idea of what he wants to see for the future of Obi-Wan, and we are about to get the largest Star Wars museum in history. My name's Eric, this is the UTD Update, your weekly look at everything going on in Star Wars. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't, and let's jump right into it. Last week, The Hollywood Reporter asked a simple question. Is Disney bad at Star Wars? Now, while this title caused more than a little controversy, and I'm sure got them quite a few clicks, the article was an analysis of Star Wars over the last 12 years since the Disney acquisition, and they came to some fascinating conclusions. They began, of course, with the box office, noting that while The Force Awakens made $2 billion worldwide, each subsequent film fell, with The Last Jedi hitting $1.3 billion and The Rise of Skywalker to a single billion. Although, let's be clear, that's still billion with a B. So, they did alright. The bigger issue with the box office, of course, is the future of it, as the article goes into detail about all of the various directors that have signed on with Lucasfilm and subsequently left before their projects came to fruition. A list that, believe it or not, is up to 10. And whether or not the current films make it to the finish line, we'll have to wait and see, but the larger part of the article pointed at the most recent focus of the saga, the TV shows. Now, the initial success for The Mandalorian was undeniable, which the article absolutely admits. The first season basically launched Disney Plus after all, and it was nominated for Best Drama at the Emmys right out of the gate. Since then, the show has remained relatively popular, but after the third season received the first real mixed reviews, they pivoted to the film The Mandalorian and Grogu. THR went on to look at the rest of the show slate, including Obi-Wan, which had pretty fantastic ratings despite being considered a limited series at the moment. More on that later in the video. Andor was universally praised, giving Star Wars yet another Emmy nod for Best Drama, and is thankfully receiving its second and final season next year. Ahsoka's ratings were fine overall, and will also receive a second season. And then of course The Acolyte, which received the lowest premiere ratings of any Star Wars show and was subsequently canceled after 8 episodes. Again, more on that later. The article goes on to mention the possibility of Skeleton Crew being a hit, with its focus being more on the all-ages crowd. They address the consistent quality of the animated shows, from Clone Wars to Rebels to Bad Batch. They acknowledge the, let's say, questionable business decisions behind the Halcyon Star Cruiser Hotel that closed within a year, but then they finish with the bombshell that Star Wars merchandise generated $1 billion last year, with the license generating $12 billion so far on that initial $4 billion investment. Which is not a bad bottom line, even before you add in the cost of everything since. Ultimately, the article circles back to the initial question by saying no, Disney isn't bad at Star Wars, but they definitely could be better. The link to the full article is in the description down below, but despite the intense title, do you think their assessment was fair? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. But The Hollywood Reporter wasn't the only outlet that gave us a massive Star Wars article last week. Variety entered the fray with a look at toxic fandom, how Hollywood is battling fans who are just out for blood, from social media boot camps to superfan focus groups. This article took a look at quite a few fandoms that seem to consistently deal with toxicity, but unfortunately and unsurprisingly, Star Wars was right at the top. Starting with a look back at Amandla Stenberg's statements on the toxicity and hate the cast of The Acolyte faced, the article then went on to give responses from those working within the studio system about what's being done to combat this, and it wasn't all exactly reassuring. While some sources did acknowledge that sometimes it's best to just ignore hateful voices in the fan space, others agreed that sometimes the hate is simply too loud. And in order to counter that, they started to implement certain strategies, like taking over actors' social media completely, with their permission of course, to weed out the threats, and even assembling focus groups of superfans to test their projects to avoid backlash, saying, quote, "They will just tell us, if you do that, fans are going to retaliate. If it's early enough and the movie isn't finished yet, we can make those kinds of changes." Now, obviously, these revelations were met with plenty of anger online from the Star Wars fandom, with many assuming that these superfan groups will likely just wish to avoid casting people of color or those in the queer community who are subject to these massive hate campaigns no matter the franchise. And whereas Star Wars put out a public statement defending Moses Ingram when racists attacked her in the midst of the Obi-Wan Kenobi premiere in 2022, their silence in the face of the vitriol spit at the cast of The Acolyte this year was noted, with Jodie Turner-Smith, who played Mother Anastasia, even addressing it herself last week in an interview with Glamour, saying, quote, "They've got to stop doing this thing where they don't say anything when people are getting dogpiled on the internet with racism. It's just not fair to not say anything. It's really unfair. It would just be nice if the people that have all the money were showing their support and putting their feet down. Say this is unacceptable. You're not a fan if you do this. Make a really big statement and just see if any money leaves. I bet you it won't, because people of color and especially black people make up a very large percentage of buying power. They might find that it's actually more lucrative for them, but everyone's using woke like it's a dirty word." It doesn't really get any clearer than that, now does it? The link to the full article is in the description down below, and I'd love to know your thoughts on what Star Wars can do better going forward in the comments down below. Now, speaking of Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor spent some time at LA Comic-Con over the weekend, and naturally, he had a bit to say about the potential future of the series. Rather than saying that he hoped the show would get renewed, as he's said time and time again, he instead mentioned that they are currently exploring ideas of what a second season could include. Now, of course, this could just be speculation on his part, but he did mention that he would love to wear Obi-Wan's Clone Wars armor and shoot even more flashback scenes with Hayden Christensen. Both statements obviously received an incredible response from the gathered crowd. Ewan's continued vocal desire for a second season of Obi-Wan Kenobi is definitely something for us to keep an eye on. For an actor who seemingly avoided the Star Wars spotlight for the better part of 2 decades, he has embraced his comeback so wholeheartedly by constantly showing up to conventions and confirming his desire to return to the character time and time again. And given the chaotic state in which Star Wars TV currently finds itself, another return of one of their favorite legacy characters could be exactly what the franchise needs. Now, do you want to see Ewan throw on the Clone Wars armor, or are there any other Obi-Wan moments you want to see in Season 2? Let us know down in the comments. And finally, if you know anything about Star Wars merchandise, you've probably heard of Rancho Obi-Wan. The private, nonprofit museum in Petaluma, California was established by Steve Sansweet back in 1998 and holds the largest collection of Star Wars merchandise in the world. Countless fans have visited the ranch over the years, and this week we learned that the experience is about to get a whole lot bigger. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, Rancho Obi-Wan is set to combine with the Smithsonian of Kansas City, the Imperial Archives of North Bend, and Boba Cabana of Seattle to create the largest Star Wars super collection in history, which will be called the Saga Museum. While the final location of this massive museum is not currently set, the proposed collection would be home to 1.5 million pieces of Star Wars memorabilia collected over the last 50 years. When asked about the reason for the super combination, Sansweet said, quote, "We're all childless and we're all getting up there in age. We've all wondered about what's going to happen with our collections when we're no longer here." Now, San Francisco is reportedly the ideal spot for the Saga Museum given its ties to the history of Star Wars, with Lucas himself actually planning to construct a museum of his own there at one point before the city denied his request. The collectors have already started fundraising the $2 million they would need to identify a home for the massive archive, and even if San Francisco falls through yet again, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Seattle, Chicago, Dallas, Boston, and New York are all next on the list. So let me ask you, have you ever been to Rancho Obi-Wan? Are you excited for the possibility of a massive Saga museum? Let us know down there in the comments. And that's it for this week. A tough look at the business side of the franchise, as well as what we can do against the growing toxicity in fandom, along with a reminder of just how many bright days there are ahead, both in the future of the series and the future of collecting. We'll be diving into all of these in even deeper context on this week's Utini Show, available wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, may the Force be with you.